You are listening to Faith FM. You have me today, Shell, and today we are going to be doing our interview with someone from Creation Ministries International. We have Michael Cook with us, and he's going to be sharing some fantastic principles on how you can talk to evolutionists and what things you can say to intrigue them and to help them to have a broader understanding of creation. Is that right, Michael?
That's right. Good morning, everyone. It's Happy New Year. It's fantastic to be back with you again. So, yes, we thought this morning maybe we would just look at the topic of how do we share with people, maybe friends, families, workmates, neighbours who hold an evolutionary worldview and believe that we are misguided or delusional if we believe the Bible.
Right.
So how to engage in good conversations with them.
Yeah, I guess to shape arguments, but without arguing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So where should we start? What should we do?
Well, I think it's really good to know. Often, maybe things people feel unequipped and maybe don't even want to share because I'm not sure what I believe. But I think ultimately it comes back to realizing it is a spiritual battle. Often people push back because of the spiritual things. If God is real and the Bible can be trusted, then maybe I have to look at my own life and work out whether I want to, involve a God in that. And so often we fall back to our default fallen position of not wanting to have a God in our lives. So that's one thing to be aware of.
Right.
So I think, but it's important to be respectful and prayerful when you engage with people. As it says in 1 Peter 3:15, in your hearts uphold the Lord Jesus as Lord, but always be ready to give a testimony or to give a reason for the hope that's within you. And that's what it's about. It's sharing your own testimony. But then, of course, people will say, well, you believe the Bible, but what about dinosaurs? What about fossils? What about et cetera? So that's when you can then have an opportunity to just engage in a respectful dialogue with them. And there's various ways you can take that down a track that is positive and respectful.
Right. Like, give us some examples.
Okay, so one of the good things is I actually say often when I speak for Creation Ministries, recommend to people, if somebody says to you, oh, do you believe in evolution? Don't just say no. Okay. People go, what? But the reason for that is if you say no, that's what they call a closed answer. It basically means to that person, okay, I don't want to talk about it. My mind is fixed. You're a delusional or you're anti-science or something. If you actually instead say, oh, that's a good question. What do you mean by evolution? Can you sort of define what you mean by evolution? And straight away that's showing you respecting them, but also puts them on the sort of back foot, so to speak. They have to then define what they actually mean by evolution. And so straight away you've got a conversation going without saying anything.
Right.
Yeah, so it's good if then they go, oh, well, animals changed. And you go, that's good. And then you start to talk about what type of change there is. So you can actually, by using respectful questions, have the dialogue advance naturally by just listening and getting them to share why they believe in evolution and what they think the evidence for it is.
Okay, I like that. Where would you go from there?
Okay, then if they actually then start to come back, well, then I say, what's your strongest evidence for your evolutionary worldview? And they might go, well, what about radiometric dating and so on? So that's where if you're equipped with some understanding, knowing our website, creation.com or Creation Magazine, and there's some excellent tracks and videos you can be aware of. But as you go down the track of this line of discussion, it's important to now realize that we're talking about worldview, not about science. Okay, so I'll just explain what I mean by that. So if, for example, somebody has a fossil and they say, well, this is millions of years old, we can actually say, okay, we don't disagree. We have a fossil. We can look at it. We can weigh it. We can measure it and so on. So no one disputes the facts. No one disputes the evidence we have in the present.
Yes.
The disagreement is actually about the history behind that. So when did it form? How did it form, etc.? So that's where your worldview comes in, what we call worldview, the way you see the world. And this is shaped by your education, by your worldview, your culture, your upbringing, what you've read and what you've studied and so on. So that's where the disagreement between people who believe in biblical creation and God and people who maybe are evolutionists and atheists is that we have a different view of history of the world.
Right, exactly.
And that is actually not that's not a scientific thing. It's actually a historical disagreement. So we need to come back to which history makes more sense.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So if we think we believe there is no God, or we believe that the earth is millions or billions of years old, and we have a fossil, therefore straight away we will interpret that fossil based on our long age and slow and gradual interpretation. But if we believe the Bible and believe the account of the flood and so on, then we will actually have good grounds to say, well, the fossil would have formed quickly, I've been very quickly, only a few thousand years ago. And so two very different worldviews focused on the same evidence.
And providing an example of that happening or something like that could be good. So is there some good cases of fossils forming quickly that someone could just quickly use?
Yes, there is. I mean, we've got some fantastic articles on rapid fossilization, including in recent times. And we now know from operational science, which is done in the lab, you can actually form a fossil very quickly if things are buried quickly and in the right conditions, and talking just months or a few years to form a fossil that looks exactly like one that is apparently millions of years old. But what you can do, you start to look at fossils. We can actually talk about dinosaurs, and I'm sure we've talked about on your station about dinosaur soft tissue. That's one of the major issues that confronts evolutionists in the millions of years.
Yes.
So what we're doing is we're finding dinosaur fossils that are not fully fossilized, and they still have detectable degraded blood cells and hemoglobin and DNA in them, which cannot be millions of years old. So that's a good way to say, well, how old are the fossils really? When the evidence from science shows that these things cannot be millions of years old, we start to see that we have evidence that starts to counter the millions of years idea.
Okay. Very good. I recently heard from, I guess, someone who just assumed that Christians, or had spoken to a few Christians, or had heard, I would imagine that from somebody else, that this is what Christians believed, that dinosaur fossils are a test of our faith because we know that they couldn't have really existed, and so that's just a test of faith, which just is such a scary thing to imagine that anybody could have said something like that. How do we make ourselves sound intelligent and understanding of science in situations where you're talking to someone who just thinks that Christians are stupid and ignorant and refuse to see logic?
Well, that's a really good question. But the thing about, dinosaurs, absolutely, we have no problem from a biblical and scientific point of view that dinosaurs existed. From the Bible, God created the land animals, which dinosaurs were, type of land animal on day 6, and they would have multiplied and been represented on the earth. And then, of course, the flood, most of them were wiped out, along with most other creatures, apart from those taken onto the ark. So dinosaur representatives would have gone onto the ark, obviously very small ones, just young juveniles. So we have no problem with that. And there's many, many accounts of cultural encounters with dinosaur-like creatures, or dragons, as they called them back in the day, yes, all around the world. So there's good evidence for dinosaurs did exist. Yes, they are extinct now, but there's no reason to say that we have a test of faith because the dinosaurs didn't exist and the fossils are fake or something. That's completely not reasonable or biblical or scientific.
Yep. Okay. So where do we go then next? What other arguments can we tackle? Well,
the other thing is, another one which is really good, is we're looking at erosion in millions of years. So the Grand Canyon, which I've been privileged to have been to 3 times, including one amazing tour when we rafted down the Colorado River and hiked and so on in the river itself. Wow. And so what you've got is a huge hole in the ground. And the standard interpretation is that the Colorado River slowly eroded that canyon over millions of years. So that again is where the worldview comes in. Did a little bit of water over millions of years erode the canyon, or did a huge amount of water in a short time erode the canyon? And when we actually look at the evidence, the rock layers, the erosion and so on, it's very, very strongly supported by the idea it was a post-flood deluge that actually carved that canyon out through relatively soft sediments. So we see a huge amount of water in a short time. So that's a better explanation scientifically and biblically for the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, okay. Good. I love that. That's a good argument to go to.
And there's many other really good evidences from geology. If you're a person you're talking to is interested in geology, the idea of landforms and rock layers, and it's amazing how many evidences there are for the flood around the world. The coal seams, the flat blankets of rock that go out for thousands or hundreds of thousands of square kilometres that could not have been laid down slowly, gradually through rivers and in the bottom of seabeds. We're talking something had to be catastrophically massive to ever do that amount of geological work.
Yep. So where would be the best, I guess, place to start to try to really reach somebody and put questions into their mind?
It's really good to, again, come back to, okay, what's your best evidence? Why do you perhaps believe the evolutionary worldview? And of course, we have to totally understand that we live in an evolution-saturated society, don't we? We're taught from childhood and through school and university and on TV and Sir David Attenborough and National Geographic, the millions of years, slow and gradual. The present is the key to the past. Evolutionary, we're just saturated with it. So very, very understandably, people would take their worldview on it. Seems well supported. The evidence seems to point to it. So it is hard to swim against the tide sometimes, but when you start to boil down to what's actually observed and what it means, we find that the case is very flimsy.
Yeah. Okay. So have you had many conversations like this with just random people? And how does it usually flow? Does it go well? And how can we make it so that it is an interactive conversation that's just going to drop a couple of seeds and not turn into something that's maybe more than we can handle as non-scientists and people who don't have as much knowledge as you? How do we make it so that we're just dropping a few seeds and moving on without burying ourselves in things that we don't know?
That's a really, really good point. Thanks for that, because we can often dig ourselves, especially if the person you're sharing with is maybe more academically qualified in the sciences and so on, and we're just a layperson who doesn't really. What you can do is just get them thinking and say, that's interesting. And if they counter with something maybe you're unsure of, or you say, look, that's a really good point. I'm not sure actually, but I'll get back to you. And that's where you go to, like creation.com, you search there and you'll find, again, huge amounts of many resources, that video facts and downloadable files and so on, that you can actually go back to them with an answer. But also really encourage Creation Magazine. If you're a subscriber to Creation Magazine, we have so many uplifting, encouraging, well-written articles that help to just pull down these ideas. But I think you just got to go down the track of just, respectfully go. If you find you're getting bogged down, you can just say, look, hey, we had a great chat, thanks for that, and come back to them. Maybe it's an opportunity to keep the door open. Don't keep on going until you find you've lost the case, or you find you've bogged down or become argumentative. That's not helpful. So it's good just to keep the dialogue going in a friendly way. And when you feel that maybe it's reached an end for that time, just say, thanks, that's great. Have a great day or whatever. So I think it's important to just gauge it in a respectful way. When it's positive, that's good. And when it starts to slow down, then maybe call it a day. So
we've only got a minute left. What, I guess, resources? So definitely go to the website, grab some articles, do that sort of thing to just really ground yourself so that you have a little bit of a base. Is that pretty much what we should do?
That's right. And we've got the whole range. If young people, especially, we're finding that social media, CMI had a real push into getting onto even TikTok, Instagram, all those ones, Facebook, etc., YouTube. We have huge amounts of resources, short videos for young people that engage them. So go onto creation.com, search our media, search our social media channels, and just share something on your Facebook post or whatever. Send somebody a link to an article, send somebody a link to a YouTube video. There's lots of ways you can feed out without doing any hard work yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. It's always a blessing to have you guys on the show. And what a great way to start the year with some great advice on how we can share the truth with people about creation versus evolution.